Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back into the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel. I am David Cobb. He is Adam Finkelstein, and we are here to break down the Midwest Regional in the 2024 NCAA Tournament. Adam, you've had enough time to digest the bracket now. You look at the Midwest Regional. What's the storyline that sticks out to you first when you take a look at this thing?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious, right? It's can Purdue, Zach Edey, and Matt Painter get some sort of retribution, after the upset loss last year and all of the narratives that have surrounded it since then. That is really the storyline that everybody is looking for. And my question is, what will be enough? Will it be enough if they get to a Sweet 16? Will it be enough if they get to an Elite Eight? Or do they have to get all the way to Phoenix and the Final Four before the Purdue fans are really satisfied? Certainly they are capable of doing that, but one of the biggest kind of subplots of this region is the health of Braden Smith. He did play in the last two games in the Big Ten tournament, but Purdue's starting guard was not 100%, and it clearly had an impact on how the team looked collectively.
Yeah, Adam, ironically, I have a Braden Smith feature in the works, and I had talked to him prior to the Big Ten tournament for this story. And then you see him go down. Immediately You're concerned about him. And then you're also like, what are the chances that the player who I chose to feature would then go through something like that? Thankfully, he looked fine. I am of the opinion that losing in the Big Ten tournament semifinals actually may have been a good thing for Purdue. Gives them another day to rest. And you remember they won the Big Ten tournament last season.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares if they win that. Yeah.
Right. And so they come into this thing off of a loss. But at the end of the day, Purdue is a force to be reckoned with. And we will dive in depth, without doubt, on the Boilermakers over this next 20 to 25 minutes. But let's just kind of take a spin through this thing real quick, because the storylines don't stop there. I mean, the Midwest Regional has a long, deep well of interesting teams. Let's just jump straight to Kansas, because the Jayhawks are limping into this tournament. You might see them with that 4 next to their name and think, oh man, Kansas, that's a great value. But you got to understand, this team didn't win the Big 12. This team has no depth. This team has some questionable health with its two best players in Kevin McCullough Jr. and Hunter Dickinson. So a little bit of a mystery there. Then you look at number 5 seed Gonzaga, a team that I think a lot of people are going to look at and think, Gonzaga, they're only a 5 seed this year. I'm going to pick them to win this regional, because they always at least make the Sweet 16. But I'm here to tell you, this isn't your normal, typical Gonzaga team. This is a team that, like Kansas, is very light on depth. Are you with me here, Adam? Like, there are some teams that, if you're a casual college basketball fan, there's some deception here with the numbers that are next to some of these names.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's not just the health of Purdue, the health of Kansas. I think health is going to be a big factor here, as it is in some other brackets. I'll give you another storyline that I am personally fascinated by, because you mentioned Gonzaga. McNeese State is coached by Will Wade. That's Will damn fine offer Wade, previously of LSU. And he called his shot upon arriving at McNeese State when he said it was going to be the biggest turnaround in college basketball. He said that, hey, we lost 23 games last year. We're going to win 23 games this year. They're at 31 right now. And the fact that he's going to face Mark Few in the opening round, and then if he pulls an upset, he could have Bill Self waiting for him. I mean, the biggest characters in college basketball are the coaches. And there is not better cinema in the opening week than Bill Self and Will Wade potentially shaking hands on the weekend. I mean, I think that's just a fascinating dynamic.
Here's my problem with that hypothetical scenario, Adam. You are so totally discounting Samford.
You're on that band.
Hey, look at this hat I'm wearing. I don't know if you can tell, but it's actually a Samford hat. All right, I'm just gonna point this out. All right, Adam. I don't know if you remember this, but I was up in New Jersey last January, and I was looking around at interesting college basketball stories, and I settled on this team that plays in the NEC that had won 4 games the year before, that had the nation's smallest lineup with a first-year coach who had come from Division II. And I went up to Hackensack, New Jersey, and I did a feature story on Fairleigh Dickinson 6 weeks before anybody had ever heard of the Peacocks. Excuse me, not the Peacocks, the Knights. Get my New Jersey Cinderellas mixed up there. But anyway, I did this feature. on FDU, and they went and pulled the biggest upset in NCAA tournament history. Well, where was I 6 weeks ago? None other than Homewood, Alabama, doing a feature story on Samford and Bucky McMillan. And here they are in the NCAA tournament bracket, getting a lot of buzz as a potential Cinderella team. And I think this is an interesting matchup for Samford in the first round with Kansas, because Samford is one of the deepest teams in college basketball. They press on every possession. They go super, super fast. And then you got a Kansas team that has no depth, that will be playing at altitude with its 2-star players coming back from injury. Am I crazy to think that there is legitimate upside to a potential Samford upset?
No, when you start dissecting the anatomy of an upset, I think you start to look at variables like tempo, like 3-point shooting, like forced turnovers. And then obviously Kansas's health and correlated lack of depth is a major factor. So those pieces fit together in what could make for a compelling upset. And I know you're not alone. I know Matt Norlander has picked Samford as well, and I'm sure other people have. I just can't bring myself to bet against Bill Self in the first round of an NCAA tournament. I mean, in my opinion, this guy is the preeminent coach in college basketball, given who the game has lost in recent years. I know they're battling injuries, but if they're healthy, they are a national championship contender. I mean, they beat UConn this year. And they've got to be healthy. We don't know if they're healthy. So it's a lot like Marquette. We don't know if those guys didn't play because they couldn't play, or if because they were just trying to get them as close to 100% as possible. So I think as good of a case as you make for Samford, I think the main variable is going to be the health of Kansas. And that is just something that I think there's a lot of uncertainty about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, we've hit 2 of the primary Cinderella candidates or potential bracket busters in McNeese and Samford. But is there another team in this region that sticks out to you that isn't Purdue or Tennessee, somebody who could make some noise out of this Midwest region?
Well, I will say this to expand the point about McNeese State. They too kind of have the metrics of a potential upset because they force turnovers, they make threes, they have good guards with Shahada Wells and Javon Garcia. But the other team that I think is capable of making one is a team that many people didn't think deserved to be in the field, and that is Virginia. Virginia is going to play in the play-in game against Colorado State, and Colorado State is a team that basically everything begins with Isaiah Stevens. He is one of the best mid-major guards in the country, and his usage rate is off the charts for them. Virginia, though, if they can shut him down, it creates repercussions for all of Colorado State's offense. And if Virginia were able to get past Colorado State, I don't foresee Texas being able to score on them very consistently. So I think that Virginia's defensive-oriented approach, and we know they struggle to score, and we know they're not playing their best basketball right now, but we also know that things tend to reset when you get in the NCAA tournament, and there's no better defensive team or defensive program over the years than Virginia, and I just think there is a clear path to shutting down both of those teams, so I'm very curious to see what Virginia can do next week.
Yes, the potential Caden Shedrick revenge game would be a captivating storyline, I'm sure. I'm curious about number 3 seed Creighton here.
Okay.
Look, let's not pretend like a number 3 seed is a sleeper or a dark horse or something. Creighton's put together an incredible body of work, but it doesn't necessarily feel like they're getting the buzz or the amount of picks that you might expect for a team that was on the doorstep of the Final Four a year ago. One controversial call in the final seconds away from reaching the Final Four. They bring some of the key pieces back from that team, like Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner, an elite rim protector. Shireman's played like an All-American. They're getting enough from Stephen Ashworth and Mason Miller to where this is a pretty complete Creighton team that feels like it's flying a little bit under the radar here. I mean, do you have any thoughts or insights on Creighton, which opens up with number 14 seed Akron out of the MAC?
Yeah, so on the plus side, because I do agree with you, I do think they're contenders. One of the things that I love about Creighton, first of all, their metrics are really good. They're the 12th best offense in the country. They're the 24th best defense, so top 25 in both. Greg McDermott annually is an elite offensive coach with a really intricate playbook. Everybody knows that. Now, game planning for him in the Big East, when you've played against him 2 times a year, because he's been in that conference for a long time, and you can never really get used to his playbook, but certainly you have a better feel for what the trends are. That is vastly different than trying to prepare for him on 48 hours notice and to try and get your players ready for him on 48 hours notice. It doesn't matter how much legwork your assistant coaches do leading up to that 48-hour window. So I think that really favors Creighton. What concerns me about them is a point that you made earlier about Kansas, is just the lack of depth. After you get those big three, they're as good as anybody. After you get beyond that, it becomes much more uncertain. So you look at a guy like Stephen Ashworth, and he is the Utah State transfer. He's the wild card to me. When he's playing well, they are as dangerous as anybody, but it's going to take more than 4 guys if they hope to make a run to Phoenix.
Yeah, he's an undersized point guard who basically replaced Ryan Nembhard when Nembhard left for Gonzaga, which is also in this bracket. And he's been a little bit up and down. Like, there's been moments this season where Stephen Ashworth has gone off, where he's hit consecutive threes and like flipped the momentum and put things in Creighton's favor. But he is an undersized and somewhat limited guard in what he can do, but he could be combustible. He could go off for 6 threes in a second round game and take this team to the Sweet 16, right? So I think that's certainly an interesting sort of dynamic with Creighton, is that guard spot there. Because Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner, I think that's who you mean when you say big 3. It's those 3, right?
Absolutely. I'll say this. Ashworth has got to make shots. I mean, he's 33.5% from 3 this year, and that's just not good enough, because Alexander's not a great 3-point shooter either. Master of the mid-range. So they've got to get spacing, and Ashworth has got to make threes. Because if they don't, then the playbook just doesn't work to the same extent.
Okay, so there's some middle seed type of teams here that we haven't touched on yet that I want to get to. Like, when you look at Utah State, and there's been this prevailing theme that the Mountain West teams are undefeated. You're talking about the regular season Mountain West champions there. You look at 9-seed TCU, a team that was very middle of the road in the Big 12, but has been through some battles as a result of the grind in that league. And then let's go to the 6 versus 11 game too. South Carolina, one of the nation's top surprise teams. And then you got an Oregon team that is wearing Cinderella's slipper coming into this thing because they won the Pac-12 tournament. And if they hadn't done that, they wouldn't be here. So like those middle seed teams that maybe get just sort of lost in the shuffle. And then you look up after the first weekend and one of them's still dancing. I mean, of those 4, is there anybody that interests you as a potential team to advance this first weekend?
Yeah, I think Oregon's got a pretty good recipe for a potential upset. Their metrics aren't off the charts, but what they have is a dominant big man in N'Faly Dante. And for as good as South Carolina has been this year under Lamont Paris, what you see from them is that they really don't have any rim protection. So while they play slow and grind you out, they don't force turnovers, but they are susceptible to teams who can overpower them in the paint. And this is an Oregon team that has struggled with depth all year long, but when they're healthy and playing an efficient inside-out style, they can kind of fit that role of a team that could punish South Carolina in the middle, in the paint. And so given that so much of this becomes about the matchup, it's just really intriguing because Dana Altman, we know he's been there before. I think in terms of storylines, a matchup with Altman and Oregon against his former school, Creighton, I know it's been a long time, but that would be a really interesting storyline in the second round of the tournament. So I like Oregon as a potential upset pick. How about you? Who do you have?
Well, I mean, I would push back and sort of vouch for South Carolina just a touch here. This is a team that has that old school Wisconsin DNA because Lamont Paris came from that Wisconsin tree. He was under Bo Ryan. He was under Greg Gard. He cut his teeth as a head coach at Chattanooga, did a great job there. And now in year 2 at South Carolina, he's got a team that is, I mean, I was at the SEC tournament this past week, and I was watching South Carolina play. They look like a football team. I mean, even their freshman, 18-year-old Colin Murray Boyles is built like a tank.
He's a pro.
Yeah.
Pro, maybe sooner than later too. He's darn good.
Right. He's a combo forward who hadn't really shown the 3-point shot yet, but man, he's got touch. He's a great defender. This South Carolina team is gritty. They are tough. The one thing I can guarantee you is that South Carolina, Oregon will be a close game. Mm-hmm. I can almost guarantee you that. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about who I've got winning that one. I don't necessarily see the winner of that one making any noise. But I think it's a great matchup. It might be my favorite game of the first round. What's your favorite game? If you had to pick one that you're most excited to watch out of the Midwest region, what would that be for you?
Yeah, Mark Few and Will Wade. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. I mean, I think that 5-12 game is going to be really interesting. But I do think, we've talked about them. I do think this is a region where you could have a lot of potential upsets. I think Virginia or Colorado State, for that matter, is a threat to get Texas. I think that Oregon is a threat to get South Carolina. You talked about how you think Samford is a threat to get Kansas. I talked about how McNeese is a threat to get Gonzaga. TCU, Utah State. I know Utah State is the 8 seed and TCU is the 9 seed, but TCU is actually the favorite, both according to Vegas and most analytical models. So I think this is a region that has a lot of potential upsets. And I'll just say, if you're filling out your bracket at home, and this is one of those pools where you get extra points if you pick the upsets accurately, spend a lot of time in the Midwest region.
Yeah, I'm with you. I filled out my bracket Sunday night after all the madness kind of subsided. I penciled in McNeese. I penciled in Samford. I got a 12 versus 13 matchup in the second round of this region. And I don't think it's ridiculous either. I think it's plausible. I think some people, though, would go down to the bottom of the bracket. They would look at number 15 seed St. Peter's and say, hey, you know what? I remember that team from 2 years ago, the Peacocks, right? What you got to understand, though, about St. Peter's is that it's a new coach, and Bashir Mason, he's in his second year now, after Shaheen Holloway used that run with St. Peter's to jump to the Seton Hall job. And there's really only one rotation player who had any experience from that team 2 years ago. So this is the same school, the same brand, the same nickname, and the same mascot, but it's not the same St. Peter's team. I'm pretty cool on their chances of pulling an upset, but it's not necessarily because I feel like Tennessee is in a great headspace coming into this tournament.
Really?
Well, you've seen this Tennessee team evolve over the years from going from that defensive-minded, slow pace, want to play in the 60s the last few years, oftentimes under Rick Barnes, to speeding it up and having a real offensive weapon now in Dalton Connect. But they're not playing well going into the NCAA tournament. Where are you at on the Vols?
I'm pretty high on them, because I think that I agree with everything you said, how they're not necessarily playing their best basketball this season right now. But as I said, I do think that some of that stuff tends to reset itself when you get to the NCAA tournament. Just the energy level is different. A lot of times the crowd is different. And you also said something that I think is really important, is that this is a team and a coach who has always hung his hat on defense. Rick Barnes, if you don't defend, you don't play. Everybody knows that. While it may seem like they have more of an offensive focus this year, and that is true, they are a much better offensive team. They are still an elite defensive team. They're the third best defensive team in the country. So their metrics are off the charts. The only concern I have about them defensively is that they allow opponents to shoot a pretty high volume of 3-point shots, which makes you a little bit more susceptible to the upset. But when you look at their rotation, listen, Dalton Connect, he's a star. I don't think anybody, including the Tennessee staff, expected him to be this good. But the rest of the supporting cast is all players that have been with Rick Barnes for multiple years. You just look at the rest of that perimeter. You got Zakai Ziegler, Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi, Jonas Adu up front. So these guys know the system. They've been here before, and this is what they all came back for. They have very clear roles, and this is the best offensive team that Rick Barnes has had in a long time, and they've done it without sacrificing defense. So while they weren't necessarily at their best last week, I just think that in totality, this is a team that has everything necessary to make a run.
Yeah, to me, it's so critical that they get substantive contributions from that supporting cast. Mm-hmm. In the regular season finale against Kentucky, you saw Dalton Connect go for 40 plus, and Tennessee still lost because the players around him were ineffective. There have been games to the contrary where Dalton Connect has been relatively quiet, but the supporting cast has been good enough to carry them to victory. So to me, it's critical that Tennessee get major contributions from that supporting cast. And so long as they get enough in that first round game against St. Peter's, they could be headed towards a matchup with Texas, which would be a game between Rick Barnes and his former school. The Longhorns come into this thing under-discussed, kind of lost in the shuffle of a tough Big 12, but a team that has some serious high-end college basketball talent. Max Asmus has put a team on his back in the NCAA tournament before at Oral Roberts. Dylan Dessou is a really good player too. I mean, Tyrese Hunter, you can go on. Dylan Mitchell is still an NBA draft prospect. Texas could be a sleeper in this bracket because they've got some talent. I know you like Virginia, but kind of how would you explain who Texas is to somebody who's trying to figure out whether or not, to pick them in their bracket?
So top 20 offense in the country, 61st best defense. They play relatively slow, especially on the defensive end. One of the things that concerns me about them offensively is the amount of they take a lot of mid-range shots. Like they very rarely get to the free throw line. They don't shoot a lot of threes. So although they have been effective with kind of those tough twos, if you will, and they do shoot a high percentage on 2-point shots, it's just not like, it's like the antithesis of what we'd expect from like Nate Oates or Scott Drew or those type of guys who are very analytically driven. And I think that over an extended sample size, or when you're playing a defensive juggernaut like Virginia, that can potentially have ramifications. Now, there's still a top 20 offense in the country. So this is not meant to be overly critical because they do have darn good players. I mean, that backcourt, as you mentioned, was A. Smith and Tyrese Hunter is very good. Dylan Dessou, we saw what he did in the tournament last year. So I also think there's a sense of like unfinished business. I just don't love their draw. To get Virginia or Colorado State, and then with Tennessee waiting in the wings, and then Creighton potentially after that. I mean, it's not, it's not great. It's certainly a challenging spot at every timeout, but that's what you expect in the NCAA tournament. But I just don't think the matchups are necessarily to Texas's favor.
Okay, so horns down. That's what we're calling it. Horns down.
Run that one by me one more time.
I was just asking if you would be willing to give us a horns down on camera, Adam. I mean, are you willing to do that? You willing to give us that?
This is gonna turn into a meme or something. How do you do it first, and then I'll not sure how to do it.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Okay, well let's get on to who we see coming out of this thing. I'm with you. This is an up for grabs regional, but to me it really feels like a manageable path to redemption for Purdue. The Boilermakers are coming into this thing trying to salvage the wreckage of last year's embarrassing loss to FDU in the first round. And I'm going to give you a few reasons why I see Purdue advancing out of this bracket. And I don't know who you're going to pick. So if we're doubling up here, then so be it. Maybe that's more evidence in Purdue's category, or maybe evidence why you shouldn't pick them. But to me, the difference is this. Last season, Purdue was like somewhere around 290th nationally in three-point percentage, shot around 32% from beyond the arc. They went, I think it was 5 of 27 from three-point range in that first round loss to FDU. Fast forward to this year, they are the number 2 three-point shooting team in the nation, shooting better than 40% from beyond the arc. Braden Smith has taken a big step forward. He's that true secondary star now. Lance Jones entered from the transfer portal and has been great. And they got about 5 or 6 players around Zach Edey who all shoot 36% or better from three, and a lot of them shoot 40% or better from three. So I think the supporting cast has improved enough to where Purdue is a safe bet this time. And I know a lot of people aren't going to buy that. They're not going to trust that. But you're talking about the most dominant player in college basketball for the last 2 seasons, who now has the help he needs in the bracket and the path, I think, to advance out of this thing and make the Final Four. Where are you at?
I not only completely agree, I would double down on what you said. So this is how good Zach Edey was last year. He had 2 freshmen with him starting in the backcourt in Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer. He was on a bad 3-point shooting team that played exceptionally slow. They were inexperienced, they didn't shoot, and they played really, really slow. Can you imagine how difficult that is for a big guy? So you're letting the opposing defense set up. You've got no spacing around you, and nothing's happening quickly. Nevertheless, he was dominant. Now, this year, put them in a situation where those freshmen are now sophomores. To your point, they are shooting at a very high clip and they're playing with enough pace. And listen, they don't play fast, but they're middle of the pack now, at least. So they've got enough tempo where things can just get a little bit easier for him. And then they've got more depth as well. So I agree with you completely. I've been singing the exact same song for about a month now. I think the only caveat is your guy, Braden Smith, in that story you have coming out about him, because I didn't think he was himself in that Big Ten tournament. I mean, I know he played 26 minutes against Michigan State and then 36 in the semifinal, but he wasn't himself. And again, like, they need their guards to be good. Zach Edey is the most dominant big man we've seen in a long time, but you need guards in March. And it's no surprise they didn't win when they had 2 freshman guards, but they need experienced, reliable guards to take care of the ball, as they always do at Purdue, and make shots and not live or die exclusively with Zach Edey being double and triple teamed all the time.
Well, that leaves us enough doubt to have some intrigue going into this thing. Will Purdue get it done? We'll see. That's our pick, but it's far from a lock. Nothing is certain in the NCAA tournament. And in this Midwest Regional, with brands like Tennessee, brands like Kansas, Gonzaga, and Creighton, who I just overlooked again. Everybody keeps overlooking Creighton in this thing. I've got Creighton getting to the Elite Eight and losing to Purdue. We'll see how it shakes out. Any parting thoughts from you, Adam, on this Midwest region?
No, this is just I would call this the bracket of retribution. As I said in the beginning, how far can Purdue get? What's far enough? Is it Sweet 16? Is that enough? Is it Elite Eight, or is it Final Four or bust? What I just hope is that Braden Smith is healthy, and regardless of what they do it with a complete healthy roster, so we get a good representation of who they are collectively.
All right. Well, we didn't get the horns down, but we got some really good analysis.
You would have shown me how to do it in your Samford hat.
I'm not going there. Look, I live in SEC country. They're coming to my neck of the woods starting next season, so I'm gonna avoid doing the horns down for now. But he's Adam Finkelstein. I'm David Cobb. We appreciate you joining us on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube channel, and we'll catch up with you again soon.